The time, sorry to be a bit late. I know there is a lot on in Calgary. Stampede. Some of us are better dressed than others. I was sorry, by the way, let me start by just with a quick apologies. The weather, biblical weather last night in Ottawa meant that I couldn't make it to Edmonton, couldn't make it to Mill Woods for Canada Day, to celebrate Canada Day, but I am thrilled to be here in Calgary today to celebrate Canada Strong Day. 3 weeks ago, Premier and I had a discussion after this, immediately after, but 3 weeks ago in France, the G7 leaders called on Canada to provide the reliable energy that the world needs to realize our full potential as an energy superpower. This morning I was in BC, I was in Vancouver with Premier Eby. We announced a landmark agreement that does a number of things, seizes opportunity through major energy projects, new trade corridors, critical minerals developments, projects that will help move Canadian energy to new markets, new partners around the world. Cet après-midi, je me suis entretenu avec le président Marcos des Philippines, un pays de 120 millions d'habitants, l'un des marchés émergents les plus florissants dans le monde, et nous sommes sur le point de conclure deux accords importants qui augmenteront près de 200% nos échanges commerciaux bilatéraux d'ici 2035, et nous avons eu une discussion très complexe, très fondamentale sur les occasions d'énergie d'arbitrage énergie canadien. Now, this evening, I'm very pleased to join Premier Smith here in Calgary to announce new measures that will unlock Alberta's energy for the world. These measures will build the strength of our entire country. They will take control of our future. They will bolster our sovereignty. Today's announcements, and this is a lowball figure. You don't normally get lowball figures from politicians. This is a lowball figure. Canadians' announcements will catalyze well over $200 billion in direct investments in Canada, create over 175,000 new jobs across the country, and we are just getting started. These benefits will be shared widely, including with Indigenous peoples as full partners, and they will create resources for the social programs on which Canadians rely. This is cooperative federalism at work. It's the kind of unity and collaboration that Albertans and Canadians rightly expect. They expect it on principle, and they expect it because it's required for Canada to prosper in a rapidly changing world. Parce que c'est la bonne réponse à une crise énergétique sur trois niveaux: l'abordabilité, la sécurité et le climat. Nos alliés le reconnaissent et les Canadiens et Canadiens le savent. You asked for it, we promised it, now we are delivering. Because when we work together, Canada controls its future. This is a new approach that helps us reach our full potential. One that builds in partnership, the federal government, Alberta, British Columbia, partnership with territories, partnership with Indigenous peoples, partnership with the private sector. Indigenous peoples, full partners in development, operating, and equity ownership. We've agreed, or at least I think that's what's in the submission that I may get momentarily, that the best route for a new pipeline is one that goes through one that already exists, south through the Trans Mountain Corridor to our Pacific coast, the gateway to the world's fastest growing markets. We've already agreed to reform carbon markets so they promote real emissions. We've already agreed to substantial methane reductions and to new measures, new incentives and reforms so that power markets can grow sustainably and affordably, and this being Alberta, significantly. We will maintain, the federal government will maintain the tanker ban to protect Canada's coastlines and precious habitats, and consistent with the MOU as a prerequisite for the pipeline, the Government of Canada, the Government of Alberta, and the Oil Sands Alliance, the 5 companies in the Oil Sands Alliance, have now agreed on the terms to launch the Pathways project the world's largest carbon capture and utilization and storage project, which together with other emission reduction commitments in the agreement will achieve 16 million tons of emissions reductions per year, or the equivalent of taking 90% of the cars in Alberta off the road. Critically, what we've agreed is that the time for action is now. We will refer a submission that I may receive, Alberta's West Coast pipeline project proposal immediately to the Major Projects Office. Consultations will begin immediately with Indigenous communities, relevant provinces and territories to determine listing under the Building Canada Act by October 1st, as per our agreement. Cet accord est bien plus qu'une entente entre deux gouvernements. Il donne aux entreprises la certitude dont elles ont besoin pour investir et bâtir. This is more than just an accord. It's also an approach that gives certainty to our businesses to build. Canada and Alberta will be equal partners in this project. As I said, meaningful ownership stakes available for Indigenous communities. We'll also benefit from Indigenous contracting and employment alongside funding to strengthen that capacity. The Trans Mountain Corporation will plan and construct the pipeline. They will work closely with Pembina Pipeline Corporation, who will bring its private sector expertise, its capital discipline to the construction and operation of the pipeline. And I'd like to thank the CEO, Scott Burrows, for his leadership and his presence. We are all living through a moment of unprecedented global volatility. Our role as government is to be a catalyst. Part of being a catalyst is to bring greater certainty, reduce risks facing private capital so there's more opportunity and more energy when shovels hit the ground. Ensemble, l'oléoduc et Pathways vont créer plus de 100 000 nouveaux emplois à haut salaire en Alberta, en Colombie-Britannique et plus que ça à travers le pays. Des emplois pour des travailleurs qualifiés, des ingénieurs et des techniciens canadiens. De vraies opportunités pour les entreprises, des contracteurs et des travailleurs autochtones. Now, we've started as we mean to go on. We will continue to work together, Albertans, British Columbians, with industry and Indigenous partners at one table instead of many to deliver. The head of the IEA said a few weeks ago, he repeated it I think a couple days ago, that Canada has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, an opportunity that will determine our future, an opportunity that will deliver prosperity that will spread across our country. Canada, Alberta, has what the world wants. Canada, Alberta, is a trusted, reliable partner in a world that's anything but. And the initiatives we're announcing today will build a stronger, more resilient, more sustainable Canada. A Canada that's worth fighting for because we are stronger together. And as today demonstrates, we are building Canada strong for all. Thank you very much. And it's now my pleasure to give you the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Dan.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you all for joining us today, along with my ministers, Brian Jean for Energy and Critical Minerals, as well as Rajan Sani, who is our Minister for Indigenous Relations and is going to be very busy over the coming months. I would also like to thank Trans Am Piping for hosting us. And today marks an important step forward for Alberta and for Canada. Beneath our feet here in Alberta, we stand on oil reserves valued at more than $9 trillion. This resource wealth presents our nation with boundless opportunities. Developing these resources would equate to hundreds of billions of dollars in government revenue that could be used to support core social programs like healthcare and education, bolster Canada's national security commitments under NATO, and unlock economic prosperity for Indigenous peoples. It would enable governments across the country to invest in the priorities that matter most while creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and driving unprecedented economic growth across the entire country. This is transformational wealth. an opportunity neither Canada nor Alberta can afford to leave unrealized, which is why I'm happy to stand here today and say that Alberta's government has formally filed our West Coast oil pipeline submission to the Federal Major Projects Office for Project of National Interest listing under the Building Canada Act. I'm also pleased to announce Alberta's government is entering into a partnership with Trans Mountain Corporation and Pembina Pipeline. Yes, Scott, this is the second time you've been with me today. I was surprised we didn't get any questions on this one this morning at the earlier one. And nice to see you as well, Kevin. Along with the federal government to execute this vital nation-building project. This submission is the result of months of intensive work, bringing together world-class technical expertise, engineering analysis, economic modeling, and early engagement with Indigenous communities and partners. After studying both northern and southern route options, Alberta selected a southern route from Bruderheim, Alberta, to a deep-water VLCC-capable port terminal on BC's southwest coast. With the help of our technical advisory group made up of industry experts, we determined that this route offers the fastest, most cost-effective path to expanding Canada's energy exports. Following the existing Trans Mountain pipeline corridor, this project builds on existing infrastructure. It reflects feedback from Indigenous groups and the government of British Columbia, reduces regulatory barriers, given it would not be subject to the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, and gets Canada's most valuable natural resource to global markets faster. The proposal also includes an equity ownership partnership and opportunity for Indigenous communities, and more details on this will be shared in the coming months ahead. There is no doubt whatsoever that this pipeline is a project of national interest, one that will help connect Alberta oil to global markets and strengthen our country's economic future for decades. The West Coast oil pipeline will transport more than 1 million barrels of oil per day to Canada's West Coast and strengthen access to growing Asian markets, helping to meet Alberta's goal to double oil production to 8 million barrels per day over the next 10 to 15 years. This project will be built safely and efficiently through an unprecedented public-private partnership between both the Alberta and federal governments with Pembina Pipelines along with First Nations. And make no mistake, in addition to the substantial new royalties generated from the oil needed to fill this pipe, oil pipelines like this are very profitable. The profits from this pipeline will generate billions in revenues over the coming decades for the provincial and federal governments and will enrich Indigenous communities that choose to partner with us. And speaking of oil royalties, Alberta's government is also finalizing another agreement with the federal government and the Oil Sands Alliance to significantly expand oil sands production and advance Pathways, the world's largest carbon capture and storage project. Doubling oil sands production is a big task. Doing so in the most environmentally responsible manner is an even bigger task, but this agreement will allow us to achieve both. Our oil sands partners will have the incentives they need to launch a super cycle of production growth in Canada's most valuable deposit of natural resources, and Pathways will make Alberta bitumen among the lowest emission heavy oil globally. We've certainly come a long way from talk of phasing out Alberta's oil and gas, haven't we? And together these efforts position Canada to deliver energy that the world needs, responsibly and competitively. Obviously, it will take time, and there is much work ahead of all of us, but I say to all people across Alberta and across Canada, we will get the job done. The window of opportunity is open now. Recent global events have made it clear that Canada's safe and reliable sources of oil, gas, critical minerals are vital to the world's economy. As the Prime Minister knows, the recent communiqué from the G7 meetings in France specifically referenced Canada's opportunity to be an energy superpower to support global demand. We must go all in and seize it. Canada cannot lose another decade or more to delay and inaction. We've heard this very clearly from our international partners from Japan, South Korea, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia, as well as from across Europe. The message is consistent. The world is asking Canada to step up and provide a more stable, democratic, and reliable energy supply that countries around the globe are looking for. This is not just another energy project, it's a nation-building project that will unlock wealth and opportunity for millions of people across the country and provide desperately needed energy to millions more across the globe. The West Coast Pipeline, doubling oil sands production growth, and the Pathways project together will define Alberta's and Canada's economic future. And now let's work together and build this pipeline. Thank you, and we'll be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci à vous deux. We'll now turn to questions. Nous allons maintenant commencer les questions. We'll take 10 minutes of questions, 10 minutes de questions. First question, Mickey.
Maybe to both of you, but what guarantees, if any, have been made to Pembina regarding this being a viable investment by both governments?
Well, I would say that one of the things that we knew we had to do in starting off down this pathway was to de-risk the project. There are many, many pipeline projects that got underway, and for one reason or another, got stalled out and abandoned the regulatory process after spending either hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. That was the environment we found ourselves in. So I would say that having both the federal government and the provincial government at the table as partners with Pembina, they give us the certainty that it is a financially viable project from a private sector perspective, and we give them the certainty that because we're partnering with them, that it's going to get built in a timely way. Did you want to comment, Prime Minister?
Well, the first thing, I agree with everything, obviously, the Premier just said. There's some synergies from the fact of having TMC as a partner in an existing route. But there's what Pembina is bringing is expertise, capital discipline. I mean, they're renowned for their capital discipline, operating expertise and discipline, and that enriches it. But decisions will be made by all partners as it moves forward, as this process moves forward. It's financially viable, it's attractive, it unlocks enormous value for the country and value for the equity holders, which will include both our governments, federal government through TMX or TMC, as well as Indigenous partners.
Next question. Prochaine question.
Yeah, so I guess since it's a like public-private partnership for both, and if Prime Minister Carney could also answer in French would be nice. Yeah, like what portion would come out of Albertan or Canadian taxpayers' pocket?
I mean, that remains to be negotiated, and that'll be one of the things that we take away. We wanted to get the high-level agreement of the partnership, and of course, it'll be the federal government, the provincial government, Indigenous stake, as well as Pembina, so it'll be negotiated over time. But what I would say is that when you look at some of the recent projections that were done by ATB about what 1.5 million barrels of additional oil sands production would do for our country, this would be 1 million barrels. They talked about $30 billion. This would be $20 billion per year, every year, for as long as the pipeline operates. And so those will be the kind of revenue figures that we're looking at. And then the ownership stakes will be negotiated on that basis once we look at finalize the terminal point, finalize the route, finalize the costs.
Et peut-être ce serait plus utile de répondre seulement en français. C'est pas une question d'une dépense fédérale, ce sera un investissement. Un investissement du gouvernement du Canada fait par la corporation TMC, premier point. Deuxièmement, il faut reconnaître que maintenant, l'investissement de TMX qui existe, l'oléoduc qui existe, c'est comme Madame la Première ministre vient d'indiquer, c'est très rentable. C'est très rentable pour tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Et ce sera une autre oléoduc qui sera rentable. Alors, pas une dépense, c'est un investissement pour le bénéfice de tous les Canadiens et les Canadiens. Avant les rendements, effectivement, les rendements d'une augmentation de la production de produits.
Next question. Prochaine question.
Hi. Have any producers committed firmly to utilizing the potential pipeline through a sort of preliminary open season process? And if so, who and how much?
One of the conversations we were having with the Pathways group of companies, and remember there are only 5 oil sands companies in that in the Oil Sands Alliance, was how we do that dual investment, not only the pipeline, but also the investment in the Pathways project to reduce emissions, but also the investment that is going to significantly increase our oil sands production so that we can fill this pipeline and others that are out there being proposed. So that process will come a little bit later when it comes to commitments, but the fact that they were walking this pathway with us to make sure that we had a three-part agreement. We'll continue our discussions with the Oil Sands Alliance in making sure that we have the right market conditions so that they can expand their production, but that's also one of the additional agreements that will stem from the agreement that we have today.
If I may, I'll just supplement, because there is, as I mentioned in my remarks, there is a MOU, Protocol d'accord, with the 5 Pathways Alliance members, which is a tripartite agreement, the 5, Government of Alberta, Government of Canada, which, as the Premier just indicated the commitments to related to Pathways, as well as the intention for the expansion consistent with what would be as part of this pipeline, but also it explicitly mentions the TMX expansion. So that's an MOU, as the Premier indicates. As with all these things, we move forward, but that's a very important commitment. And I'll just make one final observation for those who are wondering about the steps in this. We had our original MOU in November, which gave the intents of where we were going to go. That moved to an implementation agreement, a number of commitments that we made as governments. But then there's the private sector both to come forth, as Pembina has as a partner at this phase of the project, and for the Oil Sands Alliance companies to make the commitments that they're making as part of this MOU. So it moves from the public sphere into the private sphere in this broader partnership. The next phase is through the Major Projects Office and the consultations and partnership with Indigenous partners. Thank you.
Next question. Prochaine question.
Megan Podkins with The Logic. I think for months we'd heard, in some cases from you, Premier, that the benefits to the northern route had better shipping economics. There was there are other kinds of permitting benefits to going on a northbound route. You've settled or agreed on a southbound route. Is there not a concern or a risk here that we're trading a more commercially viable project for a politically palatable one?
I can tell you that we looked at both projects, and in fact, the southern route had key advantages of using an existing pipeline route, existing established relationships with the Indigenous partners and potential partners along that line, as well as the ability to reduce the amount of time to get it to market. And anyone in the private sector will tell you it's those delays that are to be in production and to be earning revenue, which is one of the big factors for consideration. So as we looked at this one and realized that they're fairly comparable when it comes to the amount of dollars that would have to be outlaid, but we'd likely be able to build this one a couple or more years faster. That factored into the decision making. I still think that there are advantages to talking with First Nations in the north about ways that we can expand the use of the Port-au-Prince Rupert. I know that Minister Sawney has already spoken with dozens and dozens of Indigenous leaders, and I think we've opened up that conversation for us to be able to talk about future partnerships. But when we looked at this one, the time to market, the efficiency of using the existing line, the established Indigenous relationships, it seemed like this made the best sense economically as well.
If I may just supplement on that, agree with the very important aspect of de-risking in time, being clear about, as the Premier just said, time to market. We're also, goes back to what the G7 asked, what we hear from Asian partners, what I heard from the President of the Philippines today. There's an energy security issue today, and so the interest is how we move towards that. And if I could broaden it and then hand to you, sir, is of course Canada's providing a variety of energy solutions, and another form of those energy solutions is LNG coming through Port-au-Prince Rupert, Kitimat, and I'll just refer to the Coastal First Nations comments today, and the consistency of what we're doing today with a series of energy projects moving forward to provide solutions. Thank you.
We'll have time for one last question. Dernière question.
Jeff Jones, Globe and Mail. So after 7 months, this project will now require government support in terms of equity. Why do you think that it remains too risky for the private sector to run with it by itself?
I would say that we did have a number of projects, and I can elaborate on them. I mean, we did have Northern Gateway that had all of its approvals, and they were then canceled. We did have Keystone XL, who had all of its approvals and were starting to build pipelines across the border, and a presidential permit was canceled. We had Energy East that was $1 billion into a regulatory approval process and couldn't see the way to a finish line, so it was canceled. So we have pipeline companies that have literally spent billions of dollars in recent years on failed regulatory approval processes. That's the environment we're finding ourselves in. And so it does take some work, I think, to make sure that the private sector proponents understand that this is a real process. There's a real commitment on the part of all three parties, myself, as well as the Premier of British Columbia, as well as the Prime Minister, to get this project to the finish line. So what the share of the private sector stake will be, that remains to be seen. Maybe over time, as more and more certainty comes in, maybe we'll be talking with Scott about him wanting to take on a larger and larger share. But we want to make sure that a company knows that we're walking this path with them, so that we can get it to the end. And I won't speak for the Prime Minister, but I did notice that they have already received a over $1 billion dividend payment from the Trans Mountain pipeline. And so it seems to me that once you get through the construction process and you start earning revenue, it is an incredibly lucrative type of infrastructure that will benefit taxpayers. That was our consideration as well, but I'll turn it over to the Prime Minister.
First off, let me thank the Premier for making that point. It is, because it's an important point. And I referenced this earlier in one of the first questions about the profitability of TMX. TMX, de-risked, up and running, now is very profitable. And it's returning real cash to Canadians that is supporting social programs, supporting other things. And this is one of the things we're conscious of in terms of TMX, Sovereign Fund, other aspects, a much bigger answer. But let me make a fundamental point, which is, and I started my comments early in my comments I said we were lowballing the scale of investment. Part of the reason I was lowballing the scale of investment is I wasn't accounting for all of the upstream investment in oil and gas. So a series of announcements, some of it's port infrastructure in BC, which is as much for other commodities, it's for goods exports, enormous opportunity. Other logistics exports, clean energy investments in British Columbia, critical mineral investments beyond. There's a series of investments which we're not counting, which the broader MOU will unlock on interties, on gas turbines, potentially nuclear investment, data center a series of other things. We are talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. The vast, vast majority of that is going to come directly from the private sector. The measures we're taking are catalytic in order to help unlock all of that. Dawn Farrell's here, and I'm going to finish with this. I want to thank Dawn for her leadership of the Major Projects Office, right out of here of Calgary. And what Dawn does is help to ensure that what the federal government is doing is creating the conditions to unlock that private investment. So there's enormous private investment that's going to come. And as the Premier said at the start, as I said at the start, and I'll finish, and that's for the benefit of all Albertans and all Canadians, including the fact that it will provide resources to government to support our vital social programs, educate our children, and move forward as a country. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If we could just do the quick photo with the proposal book.
Where should we come?
Right in front of the podium would be great.